Thank you very much. Thank you, Safad. It's a privilege to be here with you this evening, and I'm impressed by what Pranobonto Bangladesh has been involved in and how it's evolved. It's a wonderful program, and I want to thank Safad for those kind words of introduction. But it's my honor to be here with you tonight. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is about critical thinking. And it's an incredibly important thing for every educator and every learner to focus on. And I think no matter what area of studies you specialize in, whether it be, language learning or engineering or science or anything in the humanities, critical thinking is of utmost importance. And I think it's becoming even more so now because of things such as social media, the international, World Wide Web. All of these things are wonderful blessings, but they also require us to be critical thinkers when interacting with them. When I was growing up a long, long time ago, if I needed to learn something, I would go and I would maybe ask my parents questions. I would talk to my teachers. Maybe I would go to the library and look up a book to read about something I wanted to study. I never thought to myself at any point in time doing that, that maybe the information I was receiving could possibly be misinformation or maybe incorrect. I trusted the sources because I knew the sources. I knew the librarian at my school. I trusted the people who were giving me the information to the best of their ability to make sure it was accurate and truthful and all of that. Well, nowadays we have this wonderful World Wide Web. We have social media. We have 1,000 different ways to get news and information. And it now requires effort on our part, not to receive information, but to be critical in our analysis of it, to figure out, is it truthful? Is it accurate? Can we trust the source? And so, my young scholars, my students at my university, I have to work with them very carefully, especially when they're doing research, to make sure that they're getting good sources. And so we have the blessing of having all of this information at our fingertips, but we have the challenge now and the responsibility to kind of analyze the sources, the information through critical thinking to find out, is it accurate? Is it true? Can we trust it? Okay. So my presentation today, and I'm going to share my screen now, is going to focus on language learning, and also I will relate to my teaching of language and my work here at my university, which, as was mentioned, is Akita International University. So, critical thinking through language learning. And you've already heard a little bit about my autobiography. Safat was wonderful in his retelling of my personal story. But of course, I teach, I work in international liberal arts. I'm the dean of the faculty of international liberal arts. I'm a past director of active learning and the assessment center. I'm head of the English for Academic Purposes program. I was head of the English for Academic Purposes program and foreign language education. And what also brought me originally and keeps me coming back over and over again to Bangladesh is my work with teachers helping teachers. So I've had lots of experience in the classroom. I've been an educator for about 38 years. I've been in the high school classroom for 14 years, both in the US and in Japan. And the rest of the time, I've worked at the university level, but I've worked at the university level in different capacities. I've been, a professor in Japan, but I also was a professor and an administrator in the United Arab Emirates, where I ran graduate programs in education. I've also worked in Bangladesh. I taught several courses and did research on creative writing in English education, focusing on students in Bangladesh. And so I've had a blessing of having a lot of opportunities to study, to teach, and to learn in different environments. Throughout all of them, critical thinking has been something that I have repeatedly searched for ways to enhance within the thinking frameworks of my students. So I'm going to share a little bit about this. Here we go. Now, what is critical thinking? According to Linda Elder, critical thinking is self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, which attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. Now, if I break that down, a couple of things that need to be pointed out is the use of the word self, self-guided, self-disciplined. So the critical thinker has the responsibility and also the agency, him or herself, to work through their own thinking process to try to arrive at judgments about the validity, for example, of information, the reasonableness of arguments that are being used with them, all of that. So it's very much an individual effort and responsibility. However, there are ways we can do work with students in groups and through group discussions and learning that it can be more of a community effort as well. Now, sometimes people think that, oh, I teach language, so what do I need to worry about critical thinking for? Or I teach, maybe art, and why do I need to worry about critical thinking? I think critical thinking is skills should be one of the key parts of all disciplines. We owe it to our students, we owe it to society, we owe it to ourselves as educators, I think, to make sure that people are um, well versed in critical thinking. Now, this also includes language learning because oftentimes people don't associate, oh, I'm learning French or I'm learning English or I'm going to study Spanish. They don't often associate language learning with critical thinking. I'm going to be giving you some examples of lessons that we do or I have done and other professors at Akita International University in the realm of language learning to show you how we try to reinforce critical thinking skills. And I'm hoping that this presentation will introduce concepts in an exercise that will help language learners and also language teachers to understand how critical thinking can be successfully entwined with linguistics and language education. Now, Martin Luther King, one of my favorite characters from American history and world history, basically, a very dynamic individual, won the Nobel Prize, led the civil rights movement in the United States. He said this about education. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. So he wasn't talking about specific courses or specific subjects. He was talking about education in general, how it's the duty of education and educators and those who are seeking to be educated to think intensively and to think critically. The thing is, we have to give students opportunities, I believe, to enhance their skills at critical thinking. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about Akita International University. It's kind of a unique public university in Japan. I have been working here for 13 years. Before this, I was in the Middle East. I was working in the United Arab Emirates. Before that, I was back in Japan. And before that, I was in the United States. I also spent a significant amount of time in Bangladesh. Now, it is a small university, only about 1,000 students. 25% of our student population on campus at any given time is actually international exchange students because our third year, typically our third year of studies for our students, our degree seeking students, involves them traveling abroad to spend 1 year at one of our 200 partner institutions. So they actually have to go and study overseas study in English content. And so things such as language learning here at Akita International is very, very important to us. For example, our freshman students, our first year students are often paired in the dormitories. They have roommates from abroad. So they might have an exchange student from France, for example, who is a roommate of theirs. And so, how are they going to communicate? Well, probably through English is the lingua franca. So, language studies, very important at Akita International University. And for 13 years, I've been involved in various elements of language programs and language education. We are up in the north of Honshu, the main island in Japan. It gets a little bit cold here in the winter. We have snow. We have 4 seasons. It's actually quite pretty. I'm just going to kind of show you a little bit of our campus. Very green, especially for me because before I came here, I was in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi, and so surrounded by desert. Then I come here, and it's basically we're in a temperate rainforest, literally. So it's a beautiful campus. We're out here surrounded by trees, surrounded by forest. We often like to go and have classes outside when the weather is good. And if you go beyond our campus out to the region, to the area in northern Japan, you'll find mountains, you'll find rivers, lakes. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. And as I mentioned, we have 4 seasons. So a beautiful fall with the change of the seasons and the color of the leaves. We have nearby skiing, snowboarding, all sorts of amenities. We're right by on the sea coast. I can drive to the sea in about 10 minutes from the campus here. But there are a few things we need to worry about. Number one are bears. This is a bear area. So we have bears, and there are occasionally, unfortunately, attacks by bears in the region. So we have to kind of condition our students to be very cautious. Don't go off into the forest by yourself. Be cautious at sunrise and sunset when the bears might be active. We haven't had any incidences on our campus, fortunately. But we always are getting little reports from the police saying, oh, there's been a bear sighted, a kilometer away from the campus or this. And so we send out warnings to students. But I guess every area of the world, you have something you need to worry about, right? Here, maybe we have earthquakes, as Japan has earthquakes, and since we're in the north in a wooded area, we also have the issue of bears that we have to be concerned about. Now, the teaching and learning environment at my university is very dynamic, small classes. Everything is conducted in English, all of our courses, except for our specific language courses, like international students might want to study Japanese. We also have French, we have Spanish, we have Russian, we have German classes as well, Chinese, Korean. So we also have robust language programs, but the main language of instruction for all of our what they call senman or content courses is English. And most of the students who are studying here in English are not native speakers of the language. So they need scaffolding and they need help improving their language skills. And we at the same time work to enhance their critical thinking skills, which we consider to be part and parcel of the liberal arts. So it's a very dynamic place. It's a small campus. Teacher-student ratio is very low. We have, small classes, typical 15 to 20 students. So lots of opportunities for discussion, dialogue, activities, things such as that. And I have a question for you, and I don't need you to respond unless you want to chat your response to me. In your own words, what are the definitions of critical thinking? We often kind of throw this word around, this phrase, critical thinking. And I often ask my students when they first arrive, okay, what do you think critical thinking is? How would you describe it? What elements are there? There is a foundation for critical thinking, and Linda Elder, who was president for a time, said this about critical thinking. Critical thinking is self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, which attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. Okay, again, self-guided and self-disciplined. So much rests on the individual to take responsibility for their own learning and understanding. Oh, I have a chat here. Let's see. Oh, okay. Oh, one new chat. Analyzing something deeply and thinking out of the box. Excellent. Thank you very much for that comment. And critical thinking means the ability to analyze, evaluate, and question information logically before accepting it as true or making a decision. Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So we have a general understanding, and it's basically, in some ways, I tell my students this, to think critically is in a way to defend yourself. In a world awash with information and people trying to tell you, oh, you should believe this, you should think this way, you should do this politically, you should do that economically. And so critical thinking is our way of stopping everything and kind of like focusing, okay, what is true, what is correct, what is the best decision in this moment and with this situation. So it's essential. It's not just essential for education, it's essential for life, I think. So, by the way, I will mention if you have any questions during my presentation, feel free to chat them to me. If I can, I'll interrupt myself and answer them. Otherwise, I'll wait till the end. And I do intend to leave time at the end for you to ask any questions that you might have. I want this to be more than just me presenting. I want a little bit of a dialogue Q&A as well. And so my agenda is kind of simple. A change in paradigm. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about critical thinking itself. And then I'm going to give you some examples rather than kind of lecturing about it. I want to show you what we do at AIU in different classes, different courses to enhance critical thinking. And again, all of our students, most of them, are non-native speakers of English. They are sometimes struggling to learn and deal with academic English. So they are language learners. And they intend to reach a very high level of English fluency. But along the way, we must do many other things with them. We must give them content information. We must teach them to think critically. We must, increase their academic acuity, as I guess we could say. All right. And so at the end of the presentation, I am hoping, oh wait, we have one more critical thinking statement here. Let's see, from a hobby. Critical thinking is objectively analyzing facts, questioning assumptions, and evaluating evidence to form a well-reasoned judgment and solve problems logically. Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm going to admit somebody. There we go. So I'm hoping you'll be able to describe critical thinking, of course, in your own words. Some of you have already done so brilliantly. You will have used critical thinking to analyze and make choices, EFL assignment, and through this presentation, example lesson, you begin to contemplate how to integrate critical thinking into your current or future lessons. That's what I'm kind of hoping. All right, so a change in paradigm. I, for many years, about 9 years, ran the English for Academic Purposes program at Akita International University. It was a program in which I told our young scholars I did not want them to be students anymore. I wanted them to become AIU scholars. So I wanted them to change the paradigm of that. And now, what's the difference? You might ask, what's the difference between a student and a scholar? And so we would discuss it in class, but I always told them a student to me is somebody who's passive, who's receptive of information from their professor. They are not active. A scholar, however, is active. A scholar wants to learn. A scholar works at learning. A scholar asks questions. A scholar takes it upon him or herself to initiate learning opportunities. So they are active. All right. And this is not new, okay? This is not a new system. You can find here maybe a student. This is a picture probably from the University of Paris, probably around 1200 AD, and you could probably find the student there. There's one. There's a few others around in the back here. So it's not a new thing. We don't want you and we don't want them to be passive. So I tell them, we don't want you to be a student anymore. We wanted to change the paradigm. And the paradigm here is we need them to be active. We need them to be critical thinkers. We need them to ask questions. We need them to not simply accept things, even from professors. They should still question the learning. They still owe it to themselves and have the responsibility to themselves to analyze the information they're receiving, to adjust things as necessary, to question when they need to question. And that's what's important. And that's one thing that, at least as a high school, junior high, elementary school student, and somewhat also even in university, I didn't question so much. I trusted because my information sources were very much known to me and I kind of trusted them. But I should have been more critical. I should have asked more questions. And nowadays, with the huge increase in the access to just incredible amounts of information, we are now in a situation where we have to be a little bit suspicious, definitely think critically about the information that we're receiving. And so I tell the students that when they come here to AIU, I don't want them to be students. I want them to be scholars, scholars who think critically. So we try to shift their paradigm and their view of themselves. And are we successful? I do think we are. We encourage them not to be passive. Maybe in high school, traditional Japanese high school, where a lot of the emphasis is on rote memorization, preparation for examinations, and that, they were mostly students. They were passive, they were receptive, they were obedient. All of that may be fine at one stage of their life, but when they come here to AIU, we need something different. We need them to be active. We need them to act and think critically. And also, when I talk about being active, I mean, Mortimer Adler, who was definitely a traditionalist when it came to education, still said that all genuine learning is active. It's not passive. You have to keep the students. And if you're a learner, you have to be involved. You have to be energetically involved in the learning. It can't just be memorization. I mean, I think back to the times even early in my educational experience, even going way back to elementary school, what do I remember? I don't remember things when the teacher just told us stuff, unless they were like a really fun story, maybe. I remember things when I was active. Like, for example, I know how to make maple syrup. You know, maple syrup people like to put on pancakes and things. I know how to make it because when I was in elementary school in grade 2, our teacher organized with some local farmers who had some maple trees for us to go out as students, as young scholars, out into the forests and tap the trees, and slowly we would collect the sap over several weeks into buckets. And then we went out and we collected the buckets with the sap and we boiled it down. We went through a process in the school cafeteria and kitchen and to finally make maple syrup. And then we made pancakes and invited our parents to come and join us for a pancake breakfast. And so I still remember all the stages of that because I was actively involved in the learning process. So being active is important. Now, critical thinking. What is it? The word critical comes from two Greek roots, okay? Kritikos, which means discerning judgment, and criterion, which means standards. We actually use a word in English, criterion, with a spelled with a C, to kind of mean the same thing, standards that you need to apply towards any process. Etymologically, the word denotes the development of discerning judgment based on standards, based on facts. And critical thinking, according to good old Webster's New Word Dictionary, is characterized by careful analysis and judgment. It's critical, implies an attempt at objective judgment so as to determine both merits and faults. And again from Linda Elder, it's self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, okay, which attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. Open-minded, self-directed, self-disciplined. So again, it comes down to the agency and the individual's responsibility. And what are the elements of critical thinking? I've broken them down this way. We have reasoning, we have evaluating, we have problem solving, we have decision making, we have analyzing. Those are kind of the 5 elements of critical thinking when we talk about specific skills. And the first thing you get from the humanities, which AIU does the humanities, liberal arts, the first thing you get typically when they're well taught is critical thinking. So it's basically kind of at the middle of everything. And let me see if I can share this. A little video here. I tell me if you can't hear the sound. I think I have it set up okay though. But here we go.
Every day, a sea of decisions stretches before us. Some are small and unimportant, but others have a larger impact on our lives. For example, which politician should I vote for? Should I try the latest diet craze? Or will email make me a millionaire? We're bombarded with so many decisions that it's impossible to make a perfect choice every time. But there are many ways to improve our chances, and one particularly effective technique is critical thinking. This is a way of approaching a question that allows us to carefully deconstruct a situation, reveal its hidden issues, such as bias and manipulation, and make the best decision. If the critical part sounds negative, that's because, in a way, it is. Rather than choosing an answer because it feels right, a person who uses critical thinking subjects all available options to scrutiny and skepticism. Using the tools at their disposal, they'll eliminate everything but the most useful and reliable information. There are many different ways of approaching critical thinking, but here's one 5-step process that may help you solve any number of problems. 1. Formulate your question. In other words, know what you're looking for. This isn't always as straightforward as it sounds. For example, if you're deciding whether to try out the newest diet craze, your reasons for doing so may be obscured by other factors, like claims that you'll see results in just 2 weeks. But if you approach the situation with a clear view of what you're actually trying to accomplish by dieting, whether that's weight loss, better nutrition, or having more energy, that'll equip you to sift through this information critically, find what you're looking for, and decide whether the new fad really suits your needs. 2. Gather your information. There's lots of it out there, so having a clear idea of your question will help you determine what's relevant. If you're trying to decide on a diet to improve your nutrition, you may ask an expert for their advice or seek other people's testimonies. Information gathering helps you weigh different options, moving you closer to a decision that meets your goal. 3. Apply the information, something you do by asking critical questions. Facing a decision, ask yourself, what concepts are at work? What assumptions exist? Is my interpretation of the information logically sound? For example, in an email that promises you millions, you should consider, what is shaping my approach to this situation? Do I assume the sender is telling the truth? Based on the evidence, is it logical to assume I'll win any money? 4. Consider the implications. Imagine it's election time, and you've selected a political candidate based on their promise to make it cheaper for drivers to fill up on gas. At first glance, that seems great. But what about the long-term environmental effects? If gasoline use is less restricted by cost, this could also cause a huge surge in air pollution, an unintended consequence that's important to think about. 5. Explore other points of view. Ask yourself why so many people are drawn to the policies of the opposing political candidate. Even if you disagree with everything that candidate says, exploring the full spectrum of viewpoints might explain why some policies that don't seem valid to you appeal to others. This will allow you to explore alternatives, evaluate your own choices, and ultimately help you make more informed decisions. This 5-step process is just one tool, and it certainly won't eradicate difficult decisions from our lives. but it can help us increase the number of positive choices we make. Critical thinking can give us the tools to sift through a sea of information and find what we're looking for. And if enough of us use it, it has the power to make the world a more reasonable place.
All right. So one of the things that we showed to the young scholars, especially during their orientation, is that little video clip as we discuss what critical thinking is and why it's important and how we want them, maybe for the first time, to be honest, if they come out of very traditional education environments, maybe the first time we tell them, listen, we want you to think about this. We want you to have an opinion about this based on reason, rationality, and critical thinking. Now, I'm going to show you, as I promised, some selections from English lessons just to kind of give you a feel for how we try to enhance critical thinking skills through our curriculum. And I'm focusing mostly on English lessons, a variety of different levels and a variety of different types of English lessons. But I'll show you some examples, hopefully, to illustrate the points I'm making. So we have the student versus scholar um, deal, right? And then we kind of go through as we kind of discuss with them what the differences are and do a Venn diagram. Venn diagrams are wonderful because they encourage the young scholars to think, okay, what are the unique points of being a student? You know, what would you identify as being the most important things for being a student? What would you consider to be the separate important points that are unique to being a scholar? And are there any areas that they share, that they overlap? And then those are the points they have in common. So we do that kind of as an activity with them. And then I move them on to visual metaphors. And what is a visual metaphor? It's basically like cartoons. You see Napoleon and the English king dividing up the world, basically, kind of for colonies. That's an example. The other metaphor that's on a tombstone shows a candles that have been broken, so the light is extinguished, symbolic of death there. We have this with President Trump and the past Speaker of the House and Nancy Pelosi, who always in a continual political struggle. Occasionally, Nancy Pelosi, who was a Democrat, would kind of win, and after one particularly kind of vicious political fight, she won. So it shows her walking away with a sumo trophy again, just to emphasize the fact that she won. And then this one, okay, we campaigns against smoking. So you see the cigarette smoke becomes a gun. All right, so that's a metaphor for how dangerous smoking could be. And then when we talk about climate change, okay, ice cream cone is the earth and what's happening to the earth. So these are visual metaphors we share with the students and ask them then to think about this picture and how this is a metaphor, perhaps, for the liberal arts and for thinking critically. And, what I would like you to maybe do just for a moment and maybe for fun is think to yourself and chat, if you would, so I can see it. How would this be a metaphor for critical thinking? This little image. I had this image outside my office when I was of the English for Academic Purposes program. How is this symbolic of critical thinking? Is a visual metaphor. What do you think? You have this man down here. He seems to be breaking through something, but then he has this out here. What do you think that would mean? How is that a visual metaphor for the liberal arts? Not the liberal arts, for the critical thinking. I'll just give you a minute to think about it. And then if you have time, please chat some responses to us as we go forward. Okay, so a visual metaphor of critical thinking in this case. And then another activity that we do in a Foundations English course called The Bridge is we talk to our young scholars who are struggling to be academic in their usage of English about educational philosophies. And there are two educational philosophies. Oh, here we go. Yes, go ahead. I think we have Turin Das has his hand up. Did you have a comment or a question?
Okay, I was thinking about the picture. I think
Yes.
it's a metaphor for breaking out of his own mindset. I think he's
Okay.
thinking critically out of his breaking out of his own mindset.
Exactly. So maybe he has a situation where he's kind of grown up and certain mindset, and he's thinking critically about where he came from, his mindset prior, and maybe breaking out of it, which is a good phrase to use, I think, for this. So critical thinking can allow you, forces you to look at things in new ways. It doesn't mean that you disregard where you've come from or what you've learned up to that point, but you might in the process validate, like, okay, what I learned from this teacher was accurate, was correct. What I've learned from this book was correct, was accurate, or we might discover problems with it as well. And so one other thing that we try to do with the students here is we try to get them to kind of analyze things. So we go through a unit on educational philosophies, and they have to kind of do some comparison and contrast. So we talk to them about perennialism and progressivism. Now, you might not be familiar with those. The students would have to read a little bit about what progressivism is, what perennialism is, and the contrasts. And then they use this information. They use this information. Whoops, sorry. Gonna go back. There we go. And then they would utilize it to do the Venn diagram. And later, they're going to actually utilize it to kind of discuss and develop their own view of what a school should be. So that's critical thinking right there. And I give them a little lecture typically. I talk to them about what philosophy is, which again, two Greek words. We like Greek words in academia. Philos, which means love, and Sophie, which means wisdom. And then I talk about what it means in common usage. So most people, philosophy means it refers to the general beliefs and attitudes possessed by like individuals or groups. And it also asks, and I have another chat here. Ah, good. Critical thinking. We have another one here. Let me see. Analogical thinking, analogical reasoning. Oh, okay. Very good, Sabir. Thank you for that. So education philosophy typically asks about 6 questions, I tell them. And I'll just put these up very quickly. I'm aware of our time. I want to make sure you have time to ask me questions as necessary. So what should be taught? Who should decide what is taught? Why should this be taught? How should this be taught? What should the teacher do? What should the student do? So those are the questions that every educational philosophy, and we're talking specifically now about perennialism and progressivism, requires. So we have them examine these two educational philosophies, and we talk a little bit about it, that one of the proponents of this educational philosophy was actually um, this gentleman here, Mortimer Adler. Oh, I have another statement. Here from Mojave. A person on Earth looks beyond the celestial sphere. I think outside the sky are shown strange cosmic mechanism, planets, and the workings of the universe, maybe to symbolize human curiosity, exploration, the search for knowledge about the cosmos. Yes, breaking through what they see. I mean, if you think about what we see as standing here on the planet, it kind of looks like the world's flat and it looks like the sun goes around it. You can kind of understand and appreciate why the ancients might have assumed the earth was the center and that the sun rotated around, because that's kind of what we see, what we observe. Okay. But if you break through that and you really explore, you very quickly learn that no, we're on a globe. We're the sun is not going around us. We're going around the sun. And so all of these things become aware of it. If you think critically, if you're willing to say, I'm not going to just accept what everyone says. I want to think about it. I want to analyze it. If I can, I want to experiment and see if this is factual, if it's true. So perennialism, Perennial means forever. So education is based on the classics, kind of old and ancient thoughts and works that have lasted through the centuries. So based on the wisdom of the past. And the truth is the same, according to the perennialist, for all people. The same curriculum should be taught to all students. So what the perennialists believed was that it doesn't matter if the kid is in New York or in Dhaka or in Lagos or in Paris or in Tokyo, that they all need to study the same thing, maybe in different languages, but the same curriculum, because the truth is the same everywhere. That's what the perennialists say, as I'm giving you this little lecture here. And the basics, purpose of school, a place for students to learn what others have created and to use this knowledge in their own lives. The teacher is supposed to impart knowledge to the students. The student must be passive and get information from the teacher. Now, progressivism is different. Oh, good. Here I have another one. Oh, it also shows that a person should leave his own boundary and search for wisdom. Yes, I like that. That's very good. And so John Dewey was a proponent of progressivism. What did that mean? What was it? The purpose of education is to prepare students to be lifelong learners in an ever-changing society. And the principles were, number one, student interest should guide the teaching, very student-centric. The teacher should be a guide. Student development should involve the whole student. So like physical education, the mental and the physical is important for social and creative and physical growth. And also parents should be involved. This is the first time they talked about parents being involved in the education of their children. And the basics would be the teacher, facilitator, resource person, and I like this word, co-explorer. And the student explore and make their own investigation. And so they take this information and they have to go through, and we discuss what progressive and perennialism is. They do the Venn diagram, and then they have to take a look at this and they have to kind of design or choose their own. Okay, if you had a choice between these two philosophies with a group, decide which one would you want to use to build a school. And then some take progressivism, some take perennialism, but then they have to argue and discuss why. And that requires critical thinking. And I'm not going to, well, I'll show this little video clip. It's from a movie. I use this to kind of emphasize what we mean when we talk about progressivism and perennialism. And so this is a scene from Dead Poet Society. Robin Williams, he was a great actor as well as comedian, and trying to deal with, he's a progressive. So pay attention to how he interacts with the students, how he speaks to them, what he encourages them to do.
No grades at stake, gentlemen. Just take a stroll. There it is. Doing poetry is cold. Left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left, left. Halt! Thank you, gentlemen. If you notice, everyone started off with their own stride, their own pace. Mr. Pitts, taking his time. He knew he'll get there one day. Mr. Cameron, you could see him thinking, is this right? It might be right. It might be right. I know that. Maybe not. I don't know. Mr. Overstreet, driven by a deeper force. Yes. We know that. All right. I didn't bring them up here to ridicule them. I brought them up here to illustrate the point of conformity, the difficulty in maintaining your own beliefs in the face of others. Now, those of you, I see the look in your eyes like, I would have walked differently. Well, ask yourselves why you are clapping. And we all have a great need for acceptance. But you must trust that your beliefs are unique, your own, even though others may think them odd or unpopular, even though the herd may go, that's bad. Robert Frost said, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. I want you to find your own walk right now, your own way of striding, pacing, any direction, anything you want, whether it's proud, whether it's silly, anything. Gentlemen, the courtyard is yours. You don't have to perform. Let's make it for
Okay, so you kind of get the idea. So he is a progressive. Now he's going to meet Dr. Nolan, who is the Kojo Sensei is Japanese for principal. He is the headmaster of the school, and he's concerned about the teaching that Mr. Keating is doing. So you can listen to their discussion. And Dr. Nolan is an example of a perennialist, a kind of a traditionalist with education. And you'll see it in this little video clip I have.
This was my first classroom, John. Did you know that? My first desk.
Didn't know you taught, Mr. Nolan.
English. Oh, long before your time. It was hard giving it up, I can tell you. I'm hearing rumors, John, about some unorthodox teaching methods in your classroom. I'm not saying they've had anything to do with the Dalton boys' outburst. But I don't think I have to warn you, boys his age are very impressionable.
Well, your reprimand made quite an impression, I'm sure.
What was going on in the courtyard the other day?
Courtyard?
Yeah, boys marching, clapping in unison.
Oh, that. That was an exercise to prove a point. Dangers of conformity.
Well, John, the curriculum here is set. It's proven it works. If you question it, what's to prevent them from doing the same?
I always thought the idea of education was to learn to think for yourself.
At these boys' age, not on your life.
Okay, so you can kind of get an idea. And then, so we set this out for them, give them examples for little readings, an opportunity to engage the material, building up to the question about, okay, to you, and they usually do this in a pair or group, to you and your partner or partners, which of these philosophies do you think would be the best for a school? And then they have to kind of debate and discuss and think critically about it and come up with their own opinion based on that reasoning and say, okay, well, we think perennialism because, and then they explain their rationale, progressivism because, and they need to provide 3 points to support their selection. Now, this is challenging in a way because most of our students are Japanese nationals. They come through the education system in Japan. And I, by the way, was an English teacher in a Japanese high school for 5 years. So I'm very aware of the environment, educational environment, these children. Well, they're not children, they're young adults, but I'm old, so everybody looks like a child to me nowadays. They come to us and they're used to it. They're very good at like memorizing things and regurgitating information, particularly on tests and that. But they're not very good at thinking through and articulating their own opinions. And we encourage them to base those opinions on facts, and they have to decide what is factual, and that requires critical thinking. So again, you can see how we work the curriculum. They are language learners doing this. Now, this might seem kind of high level, of course, as far as their ability with language, but please understand, they come here to AIU to master. One thing is to master English. And so everything we do as far as coursework outside of our specific language courses, French, Spanish, and that is conducted in English. And then, so we have them as a secondary element. They have to build a school, at least go through and explain the educational philosophy they would utilize to build their school, to inspirit their school, we say, and then kind of give us stats and tell us about, answering the questions from philosophy, what their school would be like. Other things I use, we often use an RSQC2. Cross was one of the writers who came up with this or borrowed it from other professors back in 1993 in a wonderful book on classroom assessment techniques. It's where I discovered it. I've kind of changed it a bit along the way, but basically you ask the young scholars, after they've studied something, okay, list the most important points regarding the lesson. Summarize those points. Write a question about the material that you want answered, that you didn't understand, that you think you need to find out about, and then make a connection between the topic we've studied today and the material in your lives. Find those relations and then comment how confident you feel with your ability to understand the materials. Okay, so again, it forces the student in a way to really analyze what they're learning and understand it and question it and relate it to their own lives so it kind of becomes real to them. So these things are essential to developing and emphasizing critical thinking. We also do an English Foundations workshop, and one of our missions as a university, we say, is to make our young scholars into global leaders. And we have them do several readings, and one of the readings deals with ordered intellect. So we ask them, for example, okay, we want you to become a global leader, and you've read this article on ordered intellect. What are the relations between ordered intellect and being a global leader? And they have to find the connection for us. They read an article by Robert Harris on the purpose of liberal education. And we usually have them do this in small groups. So they're not alone doing this. They're actually discussing it with others. I teach a course on English literature. It's a sophomore level course, so not too advanced, but we cover some classic books. One is 1984. And if you've ever read the book 1984, you know that Winston Smith is the main character. He's the protagonist. He's basically an anti-hero, we would call them technically. And then we asked them to analyze Winston. How do you think he would describe himself? So put yourself in the mind of the character. How would another character, whether it be Julia or any of these others characters in the story, might describe Winston? What angle and view would they have of him? And then what are his motivations? So again, we're having them break down, analyze critically a character. All of this is to emphasize critical thinking. I also teach a course on rhetoric, also a sophomore course. And for example, I like them to break down speeches and rhetorical events into different elements like persona, subject, audience, context, and purpose, and talk about the different appeals like ethos or logos or pathos. And so I show them this wonderful little series of video clips from the movie Shawshank Redemption, where a character is trying to argue for his freedom after 20 years in prison and 30 years in prison and 40 years in prison. Each time he changes his appeal, his way of arguing, his way of talking to those who have the power to decide if he'll be allowed out of prison. And so they analyze it that way again, critical thinking. And again, these are the elements of critical thinking skills: reasoning, evaluating, problem solving, decision making, and analyzing. That's what we want. And my conclusion here is very simple. I've shown you how we try to change the paradigm for our young scholars who come to AIU to make them critical thinkers. And we utilize all of our courses, but I've given specific examples from the English courses that we teach. So language learning can enhance critical thinking skills. And then I've given you some examples specifically from English Foundations, from literature, from rhetoric, all English associated courses of how we try to encourage our students to go from being passive receptors of information to critical and analyzers of information. And I like this little quote from Josh Lanyon. If there was one life skill everyone on the planet needed, it was the ability to think with critical objectivity. And Voltaire, the French philosopher, writer, and dramatist, no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. So they endorse the idea of critical thinking being incredibly important. So thank you very much. I'm going to now, these are my references, see if you have any questions you would like for me. And you don't need, if you're shy, it's okay. You can chat the question. And if maybe, I know it's 10 o'clock there, and so maybe you're tired, it's all right. But I hope that you've got something useful out of my talk here. I've tried to show you how, within the context of my university situation here in Japan right now, with young people, primarily 18 to 22-year-olds. We try to take them from very conservative, traditional educational environments where they're supposed to be passive typically and memorize and regurgitate on tests into an environment where they are responsible for their learning and that they have to be critical thinkers. And it's a huge change for them. And so, they wrestle with this, especially their first year. And I always enjoy working with them their first year because you see so much of blossoming of intellect and originality and their confidence grows as they try to kind of like be critical thinkers. All right. Okay, do I have any questions from you? Go ahead.
Uh, it's a wonderful session I have ever seen, by the way. And so can we all give a round of applause virtually for Dr. Pat?
Oh, thank you.
Uh, uh, Thank you very much, Dr. Pat. Actually, during the session, I took some valuable notes, but I was thinking about, Bangladeshi students about because they are, instead of they think critically, they always try to memorize the textbook. So my question is, what changes would you recommend in Bangladesh education system to better develop critical thinking skills?
Mm. I think in some ways the education system in Bangladesh is very similar to Japan. It's test centric, it's teacher centric, and the curriculum tends to be organized on the national level, geared towards university entrance examinations. So, changes would be simply asking students questions that require more than yes or no answers. That's the first stage. Uh, Introduce the addition to every question of why. So you ask a student a question in a chemistry class about, okay, these two chemicals interact, what happens? They tell you, oh, there's a small explosion. Then you say, well, why is there a small explosion? Why does that happen? And then they got to think, okay, well, then what am I talking about? This goes to that. And then, so all of the subjects, if you simply start asking the students to take the information and actually work with it, massage it in a way, and then in their own words, tell you what it all means, that would be the first stage. It doesn't require much. It just requires a change in the dynamic of the classroom. Make it less teacher saying everything, students writing everything down, to a bit of discovery. Leave some things hidden in the curriculum and have the students encourage them to discover those elements. If I teach, I also teach history courses. I teach rhetoric courses, history courses, literature courses, language courses as well. But in my history course, U.S. history is what I teach. I will talk about, for example, the Great Depression. Then I ask students, okay, these things occurred leading up to the Great Depression. Can you look at the world today and find any example of possibly the same thing occurring? And so they have to kind of analyze the current world situation using as a template what was happening in the late 1920s and 1930s worldwide, and then they have to do a comparison analysis. That encourages them to explore. So a lot of it is just the change in the dynamic, have the teacher throw some of the responsibility of learning to the students, have the teacher ask the student questions that require the student to analyze, to think, and to explain. Oh, here, let's see. Okay. Oh, there's a question here. University teacher, I teach English literature. Nowadays, many students tend to rely on AI tools. Oh, yes, AI. When completing assignments, how can I design assignments and assessment strategies that encourage original thinking and minimize over-reliance on AI? Excellent question. And this is what I do because I teach literature. I teach several literature courses. I ask the students to choose a character and relate how that character in that novel would operate within the context of the student's life. Okay, so Winston Smith from 1984. If he was living in your building in Dhaka or wherever it is, with his attitude and his way of life, how well would he get along? Are there things that he would do well in this environment? Are there problems he would have? So you take it and you make it a personal question contextually isolated to the student's own life. And then it's almost impossible for them to rely completely on AI to respond. So, so make the questions more personal towards the student's life. Have them choose a character and say, if you took this character to lunch, what would you ask? What questions would you ask that person? And how do you think he or she might respond? So it comes down to being creative in your questions that you ask the students. There are ways to make questions that make it very, very difficult for AI to answer the questions for the students. And that's what I tell all of the faculty. I also do faculty development programs at our university. And AI is a big concern of faculty everywhere in the world now. But I take it, I don't, in some ways, to me, I feel like I'm kind of going back to kind of how I was teaching, almost 40 years ago. Asking a lot more questions, throwing things back to the students, having them close their tablets and their cell phones and their laptops, and listening and discussing and writing. And I try to make my questions geared in such a way that it's impossible for the student to really answer just relying on AI. So that's a suggestion. Okay, but it's an excellent question, and it is something we need to concern ourselves with. How critical thinking can be practiced for young learners aged 7 to 10 years in their language classes? Oh, very simple. For example, when I taught high school English in Japan, I used to have my students come up with ways to resolve an issue in English, and I would give them scenarios. Like one scenario that they always loved was they're in Hawaii, someplace English speaking, which a lot of Japanese like to vacation in Hawaii. And they go and they want to buy a pineapple, but they bought a pineapple and they discover that it's not a good pineapple, it's rotten. So they have to return it. How do you explain and how do you deal with the shop clerk in English to try to get him to either give the money back or get you a new pineapple? And so they have to go back and they start to think, okay, how would we explain this? And they have their dictionaries and they try to figure it out. And then they come back and it's kind of a little bit of a little play, and the kids enjoy it because it's fun and they can get up and they kind of show off for their friends and they can be silly with it. So if you develop opportunities for them to utilize the language where you don't give them the whole script, like, okay, I want you to do this. I've given you some vocabulary. Now, how would you craft, a response in this environment? That's one way you can do it. And it's been very successful for me. And I've also, even though I didn't technically teach really young learners when I was teaching language, I often would volunteer to go to elementary schools and teach classes as well. And so, I'm used to that age group and I know that they're very energetic and they have lots of take that energy and use it to encourage them to interact with the language. And let's see, critically, okay, how can I cultivate an adaptive mindset? Oh, well, I think the thing is, you need to be flexible in your thinking and you need to try new experiences whenever possible. It doesn't mean that you need to always leave your comfort zone, but try new things, try new foods, try new activities. Even sometimes they've done research on the way the brain works, and they discovered if you like go home from your workplace or your school in a different way than you normally do, it actually impacts your brain in a positive way. So change and the challenges of change help us develop an adaptive mindset. So that's one other idea I can share with you. And I see that we're kind of over time, so I know everyone's busy and you've had a long day, so I don't want to keep you too late. So,
By
but
the way, I have lots of questions, so time is, I think, over. Thank you so much, Professor Patry, for your valuable time on behalf of Pranobonto Bangladesh and all of our participants. I express our heartfelt gratitude to you for your valuable insights and valuable time. Thank you so much, and plenty of love from Bangladesh. And hopefully, we will meet very soon in Bangladesh. I can't wait for it.
yes, very
Yeah.
good. Thank you again for the
Thank you.
invitation. Thank you, everyone who joined. It's been a
Thank
wonderful
you.
opportunity for me. So thank you and good night, everyone. Good night to you all. Okay.
Bye
Bye.
bye.